Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Rufus. You've heard the names, you've listened to the podcasts, but now it's time to start reading the Stoics. So I've got for you today 2 introductory texts and 3 actual Stoic texts, which are the perfect start to learning all about this very practical and useful philosophy. The Stoics are undergoing a bit of a modern revival at the moment, and I think the genesis of that is the immensely popular author Ryan Holiday. So why is it that the Stoics have become so popular? I think part of the appeal is how surprisingly practical the Stoics are as compared to modern philosophy. In fact, modern philosophy and Stoic philosophy are so different in content that it's very hard to compare the two, and maybe it's not useful to call them both philosophy. We can broadly, though this is totally insufficient, split philosophy into 2 separate branches. You've got one branch which is concerned with how to live, how to have a good life, and another branch which is much more analytical. It's this how to live branch which is the real driver behind the excitement around the Stoics. And I'm going to start off with the recommendation that you read The Obstacle is the Way by the aforementioned author Ryan Holiday, especially if this is your first introduction to reading about the Stoics at all. I'm a big proponent of reading original texts, but they can be a challenge, and if you're not ready to commit to the sort of slower and deeper reading that original texts take, Ryan Holiday's work is an excellent introduction to Stoic ideas. The central premise of The Obstacle is the Way is that challenges only become detrimental because we frame them to be detrimental. By reframing a challenge as a good thing, we're much more likely to be able to tackle it, which is one of the core beliefs in Stoicism. The book itself moves around history with examples of real figures who use Stoic ideas, and it liberally quotes from the original texts. And while Ryan Holiday has been extraordinarily successful with not just this book, but the many books he's now written around the virtues of the Stoics, it does lose some of its impact because of the broad range of the books. It suffers from that sort of airport bestseller mentality at times. That said, it's an immensely readable book, and it's a book that you'll actually finish, which is perfect when you're trying to introduce yourself to a whole school of thought. But once you've read something like The Obstacle is the Way or one of Ryan Holiday's other works, you might be looking for something that's slightly more comprehensive, slightly more scholarly, slightly more detailed about what the Stoics said and the historical context and background to that. And I highly recommend that you read A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine. Now, William Irvine is an actual Stoic scholar. He's not an amateur like me. The book provides a comprehensive overview of all the major Stoic thinkers and the historical and political context of their different schools of thought in both ancient Greece and the Roman Empire. To help drive home some of his points, he actually includes personal anecdotes of how he's applied this philosophy. That's one of the hardest parts of reading about any philosophy, is taking it from page to practice. This book is an excellent jumping off point to going on to primary study of the Stoics. You'll have a much richer experience of reading those texts. Now you've got some of the necessary background and an overview of what they're really trying to achieve. Now I'm going to suggest that if you haven't read any primary text from the Stoics, that you start with the Enchiridion by Epictetus, or as it's more commonly known, the Handbook. You're going to find this work usually included with a book referred to as the Discourses, which is a much broader collection of Epictetus's work. Epictetus was a former slave and a Roman Stoic, and we're lucky to have the Discourses. Epictetus, like Socrates, didn't write anything down himself, and what we're reading is the recollections of one of his students, Arion. Now, the Enchiridion, or I'll call it the Handbook, it's a little bit easier to say, is a condensing and expansion on lots of the themes in the Discourses, but what it really hones in on is actual practical advice on how to live. It's very short, I think it's about 35 pages or so, so it's very, very readable. And it's something that I personally always have in my rucksack that I can reflect on it again and again and again. You can just read like one short section of it. It's sort of split up into these sort of separated ideas. And you can think about that for a day, a week, or even a month. And once you've read the Handbook, if you enjoy the style that Epictetus has, which really echoes through the centuries and the millennia in this immensely readable way, then you've got the perfect introduction to going on to reading the Discourses, which is a slightly more challenging text and will require a little bit more study. I think my next suggestion will come as to no surprise with anybody who's familiar with the Stoics, because it's almost in every single introductory list, and that's for a reason. It's the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Now, the Meditations is a completely unique work in the sense that these are the personal recollections, the personal thoughts and diary of one of the most powerful people in the world. What's so fascinating about the Meditations is that this isn't a philosopher telling us what he thinks. This is somebody who is a student just like us, struggling with these ideas, struggling to apply them, struggling to understand them. You know, he writes in this style of sort of constant reminders of his flaws and what he needs to do to try and improve as a Stoic and a human being. It's for that reason that so many people have found comfort and wisdom in the Meditations. I find that the Meditations to be incredibly comforting to know that somebody who was so powerful and in such a high and important position had very human struggles just like me. Aurelius struggles with envy and pride, in anger and unjustness, just as we do. I'll leave you with one of my favourite quotes from the Meditations that I think about all of the time. Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been harmed. My final suggestion for primary text to get you started reading the Stoics is the Letters from the Stoics by Seneca the Younger. These are a collection of 124 letters written to a guy called Lucilius, who was a sort of government official. We only know that he existed through these letters, not much more else is known. And again, I'm selecting this piece because it's deeply practical. This isn't a philosophical text as such, as one Stoic trying to advise another Stoic on how to live and how to act and how to solve his problems. Now, it's a much larger commitment reading the letters, but luckily they're split into, well, letters. So you can just select one of them and you can read it, think about it, contemplate about it, and then read the next one. In fact, I would say it's probably not that rewarding to just sit down and read all 124 of them. It's something that you should keep with you as a companion. This work has found a sort of kindred home amongst entrepreneurs, CEOs and athletes. And while that's not my thing necessarily, if it is for you, and that's absolutely fine, rest assured that names that you've heard of, consult these letters on a regular basis. One of the best collections of these letters is Tim Ferriss's Tao of Seneca, which includes a very, very comprehensive translation of each of these letters, which is very readable, and also an excellent reading list for more Stoic ideas. It's just one last bonus suggestion for you is any of the writings by Admiral James Stockdale. James Stockdale was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War, and he was shot down and held captive in a political prison in Hanoi, in which he spent over 4 years in solitary confinement and was tortured multiple times. He owes it to the handbook that he managed to get through that experience, and his writing is absolutely fascinating. Now, for me, I read Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot, which is a collection of essays and speeches that he gave talking about philosophy and the Stoics in the context of this practical application to this truly horrendous period of his life. However, he has an essay, Courage Under Fire, which you can purchase separately, which really covers most of what you need to know about what he had to say about this topic. If you don't think that philosophy can help you in your day-to-day life, then I'm afraid that James Stockdale is just going to prove you wrong. Now, these older works always have a lot of different translations, so what I'm going to do in the description is I'm going to link to one link which is my favourite translation, and another one which will be a free translation available online. These are a little more difficult to read, but they're free and you can read them right now. And if you're interested in the Stoics, remember this is just one branch of philosophy, and while it's a very popular one at the moment, it's important not to be dogmatic about any particular branch, and also understand some of the criticisms that were made of those branches. And if you like thinking about this stuff and talking about this stuff, then you might like lots of the things that we're doing on this channel. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Pages to Practice, and my name is Harry Smith.